Okay. Um, so please unmute your camera and so on if you are agreeing to the recording and transcribing policies.
Oh, sorry about that. Did you hear me?
Yes, I mean,
About the,
yeah,
okay, the timestamps. And
Yeah,
then,
I'm good.
yeah. Also, before you go in that discussion, may I just recap what we didn't recall the last previous few minutes? So just wanted to recap that the agreement that we reached was that instead of trying to define specific structured methods for negotiating control protocol and supported one, will rely on the leveraging the free form text as exchange mechanism. Also, what we agreed in the previous minutes of discussion was that we would have that a control channel has to be supported by each service, in which the clients could negotiate in free text the type of parameters that they would like back and forth. And then on the data channel, the exchange mechanism would be a free form text, and some control commands can be carried in the data channel optionally. So that's our just recapping the summary because we forgot to turn the record button. And now let's start with the discussion that John, you had. If you don't mind, just repeat your question.
yeah, so this is sort of an example. If a couple of things come to mind. I mean, first, the timestamps of the each sentence that's transmitted in a chat session. Would that go in the data channel or the control channel? And then also often most apps nowadays or platforms nowadays have some kind of spelling correction. Do we transmit the unspell corrected or the spell corrected text from the client to the server? It's not completely clear. I mean, I imagine because the spell correction is done for the client. I mean, I guess you probably wouldn't get to see the uncorrected one, but anyway, just throwing it out there.
Yeah, no, definitely. So basically, here's my thoughts. Like, no, one, since we're talking about the protocol, so it's between the flowing, say, between one logical client box to one logical server box. Now, the client and server themselves may have their LLMs and they'll be doing whatever modification that has to be done. And that would be the, essentially um, up to individually whether or not they correct it. The correction on the client or the server side should not reflect itself in the protocol description, right? Because they can each correct it. They can each side can do whatever they like on the thing they have to send before putting it on the wire. And the protocol only deals with things in the wire. So the question of correction should be at least left out. And I think another topic would be whether, in addition to protocol, we should also have the things on what is required on the client, what's due on the server. So the client and server specification, including things that Yanbing had raised, some of them may need to be in those documents, but the protocol per se shouldn't make any assumptions about the um, about the uh, content, whether it's corrected or not. The protocol should specify just the restrictions on how you carry the thing. Now, on the data channel too, we should be carrying a JSON format, where the JSON format says, hey, this is the format and this is the content, like natural text, language English, and the third field is open data. Then image, whatever format, JPEG or name xyz.jpg, and then the byte encoding. So things of that type should be flowing on the JSON, which basically are enough for the other side to know how to process it or make their life easier how to process it, as opposed to trying to go through opaque block and figure out what it is.
Okay, but how about the timestamps? I mean,
Yeah.
it seems like, yeah.
Yeah, so the timestamp is interesting because the question is that each the client and server would have their own time. They would have their timestamp. They both have the protocol. Things went, things came back. So they can both have their own internal timestamp mechanism. And they can both say this is the time it did, this is the time it happened, because the time even clocks would not be synchronized necessarily, or well, they will always synchronize, but not necessarily to a certain level of precision. So the question is, do they need to transfer time over to the other side? Because if needed, each person should be recording, the client side and the server side should be recording the time and keeping it on their own. So in the spirit, if we adopt the philosophy that we should not transmit or specify between the things anything that is not a must-have to define,
Okay.
I would
Okay. So
argue
then,
that we shouldn't be including time.
okay. Okay. So then the other thing, well, of course, it might be important to know the person who typed the message, what their local time was. But in any event, okay, that's somewhat subsidiary. But the
Are there
I think,
some use cases where you think it would be needed or necessary to include the time? I mean, because I'm going by abstract philosophy that the person can measure their own time, so they don't need to send the other person the time. But is there a use case, a scenario where, that philosophical principles don't work in practice all the
oh
time?
well, I think when you're chatting with somebody, which I'm just imagining you're chatting with somebody, and if you know the time zone they're in, for example, you get certain information. So, for example, I can't remember the fellow's name, but was it Raj? Raj. Okay, so he was 3 hours earlier in California. That gave me some information about what sort of things to say at the very beginning of our meeting, right? So it was informative knowing that, and I think that so somehow the context that can be pulled out from a chat session should somehow be available to make the interactions as rich as possible, right? Yeah, even for example, if you know the location of the person, maybe what their native language is. I mean, these kinds of things. Anyway, I'm just throwing it out there, those things out there. Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's that's one of the things, that in the spirit of the thing, if suppose the location is important in order for the communication, so the first thing that the system can do is that on the other side, because you almost all, well, in most cases you may have the IP address visible on the client side, but even assuming you don't, you can also say that, okay, the server, if it needs to know the location, can in the first control interaction say that, yes, thank you, but can you tell me your location? I only service people, if you're connecting from the United States, are you connecting from the United States?
Yeah.
The other person can say back. So the thing is that those type of attributes about the individual can be and should, if needed, can be negotiated can be exchanged on the control channel in the text format. And the server could say that, okay, you didn't confirm that you are from the United States, so I cannot, I'll terminate the connection.
Okay, but these aren't explicit parts of the protocol.
Yeah, so we don't have to specify these attributes specifically, but basically the recommendation would be that anything that the server requires, the server asks them for the client, prompts them.
Okay. Okay. Another question I have is that if a client connects to the server at somewhere, do they have any access to prior chats or no prior chat history, or do they just start hearing things at the point they connect?
They may or may not have, because if you think of initially, I'm just trying to think, let's say of a retail store. When I come in, I want to ask, okay, hey, I want to buy something, but I don't want to tell them anything else other than what they need. So they may want to say, okay, which jurisdiction, because I need to know what I can sell to you and not sell to you. Right? So I will ask the thing, which jurisdiction, and yes, I have got these type of things that I could sell and whatever, shipment, etc. So that's the one thing which I want to offer without having any past chat history. But suppose I go to a bank and say that, hey, I want to check in everything. Okay, tell me what your username is, your username and your authentication, whatever the authentication mechanism. And once that happens, now the bank could have stored all the information of the prior chat history and the current thing, which they could essentially retrieve and use that to build as needed on the bringing into the conversation. The one thing, I mean, like the one, if you look at some of the current chat protocols, like for example, what the standard chat protocols supported by some of those, LangChain or Ulama and others are, they basically are going with a very simple model that, okay, the client has to transmit all the messages to the server all the time. So basically when I chat, I have to send the full chat history to the server and the server generates on that. And I think that may be an inefficient one, but the server may in the control channel may say that, okay, I'm going to record, I'm going to keep up to whatever, uh, 20 messages and no more. So basically, and so that when the person comes, they just have to give the client and server just have to send the current exchange, and both sides can retrieve the history from the local storage and put that in. So uh, that's a convention. That's a convention. That's a thing that we could essentially, one of the things that we would have to specify as the explicit, that you send the message only, or if the message exceeds certain number of history, then you have to, and you want it to be included, then you have to send the history explicitly if you exceed those 20 things. I think Raj has a hand up, and I thought Sugi also had his hand up, but Sugi then I think dropped off. Raj, go ahead, please.
Yeah, hi. I think so let me comment on the current one, right? About the previous context, like that will depend upon a number of factors. Again, capability of the different systems to maintain that context over an extended period of time. Like I could send, for example, a message in the evening and then I go to sleep, and next morning I could send a follow-up to that message. And is that considered, continuing the context or history, or how far is it like a conversation I had 2 days ago? It all depends upon a number of factors. But I want to go back to the previous sort of topic about time and location, so on. So I think if time as policy or location as policy, that's a control object, right? Do I service the US, or do I want to respond to you after 5 p.m., right? Those are all policy items for which you need time and need some to control the conversation. And that is time as data, right? I want to know how far I am from the meeting or from the conference center. And that time is route for analysis in order to figure out whether I'm going to make it or not. Right? That's got nothing to do with policies. Time as data, location as data. And that would be part of the data channel.
Okay. So basically, depending on which way a certain topic is being used, it should be the control or data. Okay.
Right.
Okay. So I think since Sugi, what we also want to do is, since Sugi is here with a slightly unstable connection,
Yeah,
Sugi, do you want to, you had put forward a very interesting topic. Do you want to mention that so we can
if you got the gist of it, it might be better that you do it since my connection is bad.
I think I got the gist of it, but basically you'll have to fix, you'll have to correct me. Everybody saw the email, so so in case I get something wrong, I would request you to correct, or the people on the call to correct me. Also, Jinjun, who also had something very similar thing, is not here. He can't make it today. But the basic idea was that that we consider LLM as more like a lower layer of a compiler, and then the client, what we're trying to do is we're trying to do a job or a business function on top of that, like basically we need to translate what the business use case is to the capabilities of that LLM object, the large lower level LLM capabilities. And in that translation process, if they're remote, the translation attributes that need to go from the higher level business to the lower level things are the ones that need to be standardized or need to be incorporated and supported in the protocol. So Sugi's suggestion was that we treat the LLM as a lower level thing. We treat the business cases as a high level business problem or high level language to be translated. And then we look at the translation process using how do we compile from top to bottom. And that basically that compilation process or looking at the that theory of how the compilation happens would let us identify what should be in the protocol and what should not be. I mean, Sugi, if I got something wrong, let me correct me.
Yeah, that is the gist of what I had in mind, right? So I think the design process will focus on the IR, the intermediate language, the intermediate representation. So we have control channel. We talked about control channel and data channel earlier. So from a user point of view, if we have this LLM construct in the middle, the virtual machine in the middle, then they probably don't need to know about that. Just say, I want to make a transaction, and then internally, the virtual machine will translate that into using the control channel or using the data channel. So from when facing the front end, maybe we only have here is the transaction, right? The first instruction set will be start transaction or start communication, and that will automatically start the control channel. And then that will add maybe we'll need to have another instruction that says, I need to send an image, and that will automatically start the data channel without the user needing to know that, oh, I'm using the control channel, I'm using the data channel. It will all be interpreted by the virtual machine. That's just the first example. If I also want to go back to what John said earlier about the timestamp. I raised my hand before I got cut off. Is that what I can think of it would be useful is that when I make a transaction, even though my clock is different from the server clock, it will be nice to have a receipt from the server saying that I started your transaction and here is my timestamp. So in case of any dispute in the future, I can show that receipt saying that, look, I did this transaction at your timestamp of this. Then you can look it up and confirm it, right? Yeah. So yeah. So in terms of the virtual machine, so if we could, if we like the intermediate representation idea, then it will help guide the discussion of saying, instead of ad hoc deciding, do we add this feature, not add this feature, we can ask, does this extra instruction set improve the expressive power of the language? What is the minimum set of instruction set needed for the language?
Yep. Yeah. Actually, I think I really like the thought of doing this, what I'll call a little bit more rigorous way of assessing whether or not what to design. At the same time, I think if I can comment on the receipt type of things, including time, like now, basically, depending on the business use case, there will be people sending back and forth different type of objects. And if I think of a transaction, then basically one of the things that has to be sent is, okay, here's a receipt, which is PDF or whatever, some other document. And that essentially is the type of thing which the server should create a receipt with all the tracking data, information, customer, whatever, etc. that is needed in the receipt, which is a server specific thing. And then, okay, this goes as a PDF or whatever other text format is basically what the protocol has to support, that, okay, you can take the attachment and say, here's a document attachment type, whatever, PDF or name, this name x.pdf, and then send it over to there.
Yeah, it could certainly be it could certainly be a business level object as opposed to part of the control protocol.
Yeah, I think I would like to promote a philosophy of minimalism, in the sense that we try to put as few things in the protocol as possible. I mean, we should put everything that is necessary, but let's try to keep it as small as possible, and that will make us more future-proof.
That's the advantage of adopting intermediate representation, right? Because now we can talk about the expressiveness power of the language, right? Instead
Yeah.
of subjectively saying, "Oh, this is useful, this is not useful."
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And that formalization is really great. Although I think I would say that as we go through the formalization, we should go through formalization, but we should also have it like we'll have to walk two boats. Like, one, we should try to formalize, and the other is concurrently we should try to build some real world examples and learn from them, because the challenge always formalization is sometimes we get stuck on it and it's hard to get the concrete answers. So I think we should try to do both a formalized approach and let's try to build some, what you can call ad hoc ways based on the subjective collective intelligence that we all have, and in the middle
Well,
of both we'll have a happy union.
yeah. So to show that the current set of instruction lacks certain expressiveness power,
Yeah.
would be to put up a use case saying that I cannot do this with the current language, right?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay. So Sugi, I know you don't have a good connection and Jinjun is not here. Are there any other examples where this has been similar type of approach has been used for validating protocols, doing or things like both Jinjun suggested he was doing something of that, but he's not here. So I was wondering, I mean, like Jinjun.
I only know of it. I only know of it from a compiler and programming language design, right? So the Swift programming language, every time they want to add a feature, it goes through this rigorous process of what is your use case, how it can only be done with the existing features.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay, so we should then, yeah, then maybe that would be a time we should think of, like we started talking about the use cases in the last call. Maybe we should try to have a discussion, okay, what should be a first initial use case that we should try to design around the protocol and see what works and what falls apart. I mean, last time we had discussed, I think, a customer care use case. We can also go with a like whatever with merchant use case, bank use case, any other use case that I think the something which is interesting, because for the use case I think the main thing in the choice would be it should be something reasonably real world that we can show that hey, this protocol is useful, but it shouldn't be something that drags us into a lot of complexity, because implementing any of these servers in itself for many of the real world use cases is complicated. So if there is actually a server which is based on a real life or an open source workable server implementation for use case, that would be great. Otherwise, of course, we can always build our own things too. So I just
From what we talked about last time, the use case that seems most compelling to me is to have this verification business, right? So I got an answer from ChatGPT. Can I ask Llama to verify it? Can I ask another?
yeah. Okay. So so basically, so the client will go have a conversation with one server, receive the request, and then validate it with another server. Okay, we can. I think we can try to go with that. I mean, the one thing, yeah. Okay, we can start with that use case. I mean, the only thing is that it's a rather in some sense, a theoretical use case. Wouldn't it be if we are trying to look at saying that our end goal is we do simplify a lot of the applications with a single application? Won't more of a better use case be things like I do a I interact with a bank, or interact with a customer service rep, or interact with my telephone company, or I make a payment, or I attend a conference? Won't they be? I mean, I'm all for. I'm okay with this aggregated use case to start with, but won't we need a use case which is more of no, something much more which could relate to a practical case, to be um, to to make a case that, hey, this protocol that we're doing is actually would have a lot of real world implication. Does anyone have any thoughts on? I mean, so Sugi has aggregated use case. Anyone else have any suggestions on the use case? If not, the aggregation use case would win by default, being the only proposal on the table.
Yeah, but I mean, I don't love this use case too much, but I need to come up with a better one if I don't like this, I think. One thing also that I'm not too clear about in the architecture, are we doing anything with voice, or is it just chat?
No, we can add voice.
Voice
because the interaction, basically, I mean, the thing is, we can't do just text. We need text, we need image, we need documentation. So we'd also need voice, right? And voice over carried over would require some streaming protocol to carry over.
Yeah, because one thing I'm not clear about is what services we provide for voice. I mean, are we just going to stream over the voice, or are we going to do the speech to text translation for this client, or what are we going to do?
So the thing is that if you think, we are currently focused on the protocol spec, right? Yeah. So what goes between one client box and one server box? And the box, logical box, this could be Docker containers, VM, etc. So the user may give voice, and the voice could, in some sense, if the local LLM or client itself does the voice to text translation, then the protocol doesn't need to see that. On the other hand, there would be use cases where the voice goes to the server. So the server does a text translation and then responds back. So, and I presume that there would be use cases where that would be the case, especially when the client is not powerful enough to do the voice to text. So, so I think effectively we'll have to support the case how to transfer voice to the other person, from the client to the server, which should go, okay, here is the
server to clients.
Sorry, yeah, client to server.
Although it depends, I think, in a lot of cases whether, I mean, sometimes the client's going to be doing because the client receives the signal, right? So I think this has to be thought through carefully, and also. Do you want to allow the possibility that different clients have different speech to text translations, or not? And yeah, sure, yeah. I mean, it may. I don't know. The right answer is.
So I mean, when you say different clients have different speech to text translator.
Yeah. So imagine that. A client could not do this. You know, there's going to be some very low powered clients that won't be able to do speech to text translation. So if the speech to text is done on the server, or maybe the server doesn't do it, it just punts the job to all the clients, then conceivably all the clients will have their own different translations of the speech to text. Do we want to allow that? I don't know. I mean, and if the client happens to do the speech to text translation, does that get sent to the server and then broadcast to all the clients? I don't really know. But I think
Yeah.
this is an incredibly important use case because it may become the primary mode for chat. I mean, it very well could be that the primary way we interface in the future will be all through voice.
Yeah, no, we can, for example, consider the case that just got dished by McDonald's, ordering through the voice, right? And then this could be basically like, no, so I have got a client. As a user, I'm talking to the client saying, here's a voice, and other side is a server whose job is to order whatever, uh, milkshakes and ice creams and whatever I want to eat, right? So in that case, there is a client, there's a server, and there's a protocol on the wire. And we can imagine several scenarios. One scenario is that the client has done the text translation, speech to text, in which case the wire only says, okay, there's some text going in, and then goes to the server and server processes it. Then the other modality is that the client voice is just transferred over to the server, in which case the server needs to have a way to carry that voice clip, right, to the other side so that it can essentially, server can then do its translation. Now, on the server side, there are a whole bunch of other issues in doing this voice translation, filtering out noise, filtering out language, and so on. But those are in some sense a server side consideration for the use case. And the client side, and again, the client could, you can even say that between the client and server, there should be a constant channel which should be kept open so that both sides can talk over the voice channel back and forth. Or there could be that, okay, it's an intermediate, you captured a snapshot of voice, you carry it out to the other side, and then the other one comes in together, and it gives the illusion of a constant connection, but it just, I'm taking samples of the voice and transferring. So those type of consideration impact the wire in the middle, how we carry voice or other channels, like those would impact the protocol. But there are a lot of issues, lot of important issues in a voice recognition, which will only impact the server. So I think what we should focus in this group is on the issues that impact the how it goes between the client to the server. Only those issues, and those are important issues, that how do we establish the fact that, okay, underneath there will be a separate connection. So between the client and server, you have to allow setting up of a whatever separate WebSocket or something on which the message flows. So that use case support using this protocol will require, how do we one thing is, of course, on a REST connection, you can essentially transfer a sequence of messages, but that sequence of messages essentially restricts you to capturing snippets and transferring. On the bottom, you would have either a HTTP persistent connection, or you may have a WebSocket, right? So the question then is that, and that have both WebSocket and HTTP have persistent, have addressed the question of relying it, and will be riding on top of that as a sort of a generic application level. So I don't know, at first thought, I would think that capturing snippets of voice, having a binding underneath either with WebSocket or persistent HTTP would give the illusion of a continuous voice connection or a continuous video connection, which again, I think or whatever the right binding there is supported, we can just piggyback on that, and that would be suffice from the protocol specs perspective. Now the server sides would have its own other issues, and we may have to consider at least we should put them on slightly lower priority, or unless we want to unless we write a server side spec also, but that probably we should defer to the next stage. First get the protocol in shape, and then we look at the client and server side issues.
Yeah, well, I think the voice needs to be discussed somewhat in the document. Yeah.
Yeah, voice or voice and video. how they.
And well, I think even voice more than video. And also, if you have several parties in the chat, does everybody have their own voice channel, or is it just mixed into one? You know, I do this podcast, and you get much better performance when you have each person recorded on separate channels. And so some applications would prefer to have separate channels for each speaker.
Yeah, and I think basically it again, if we look at the binding, in most of those cases, it will be from a multiple client to a server in a joint session. And so each one has their own channel and the server does the mixing as a server side function. So the protocol is a point-to-point protocol with the mixing, etc., being done by the server endpoint.
Yeah, one thing we haven't considered, I think, in the document at all is multi-party chat.
Yeah,
that's important, quite important. Yeah.
I think it is important. We wanted to first make sure that we can flesh out this two-party and then go to multi-party, because a lot of business use cases are just two-party.
So unless we consider the verification thing with got cut off on, that you ask the question, ChatGPT give you an answer, then you go ask Llama for a second opinion or to verify ChatGPT answer, then in that case, it's multi-party but against agent instead of humans.
Yeah, and it is a multi-party composed of multiple single-party things. So the multi-party interactions can be faked by a series of two-party interactions. Kind of like you have a graph structure and you just consider them link by link. And if a link by link interaction, then you can sort of fake and simulate the whole graph structure as an aggregate. I mean, it may not be the most efficient way of doing it, I agree. But it will functionally meet it will be able to functionally give the answer. So that's why doing the two-party first is a must-have. And then by composing multiple two-parties, we have a multi-party solution. And then we can say, okay, how do we make this multi-party solutions more efficient for the most common use cases? Okay, so I think what I'll do is I'll go update the specification based on our recording and transcript, because we are coming close of the time. We have one possible use case on the table, which is this verification use case or validation with a second large language model. So we can start fleshing out that use case, and then let's all think of other use cases. And when we interact again next week, we can hopefully have more discussion both on the formal spec, if Junjun is here, and we can see what Junjun has done, and we can have a discussion on the other use cases or thoughts that we may have about what the right use case would be.
Okay. And also even things like multi-party chat or voice, even if we don't have content, we should put placeholders in there, I think.
Yeah.
Okay.
And hopefully I will have better connection next week.
Okay.
Okay. Yep. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks. Bye.
Thanks. Bye for now.